Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to our channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about data collection rule, also known as DCR. Now, this is the most important concept that I'm going to talk about, and this is the most important video for this entire series, as well as Microsoft Sentinel series, because if you know how data collection rule works, you can save a lot of cost. Okay. Now, if you're watching this series from the beginning, I assume you already know what is the purpose of Azure Log Analytics Workspace, a centralized repository where all the data will get ingested. Then you have Azure Monitor Agent that will be installed on Windows and Linux machines, which will help you to capture logs from these two platforms and get them ingested to Log Analytics Workspace. But now let's talk about the most important aspect, which is data collection rule. I mean, because of which you will be able to achieve these scenarios or perform advanced level configuration. Okay. Now let's get started by knowing data collection rule itself from a definition perspective. Okay. Data collection rule is basically a configuration which lets the Azure Monitor Agent know what type of data must be captured and forwarded to data ingestion pipeline. Then are there any transformations which must be applied before the data gets ingested to the workspace, and where exactly the data must be ingested, precisely speaking to which table of the workspace. Now, whenever a data collection rule is created for each and every data ingestion workflow, there will be a specific set of configuration which is available in the DCR, which lets the API know that to which table a specific set of logs should be ingested. And I will be showing you all this in this video itself. Okay. Now, data collection rule can be created for Windows, Linux, and other platforms as well, where you might want to use data ingestion API of Azure Monitor or let's say Log Analytics Workspace. Now, what do I mean by this? That let's say you have a platform where you have an application and that platform is not supported, but still you want the data or the logs of that particular application to be ingested into Log Analytics Workspace. You can ingest those logs with the help of Log Analytics APIs. And then you can also define a data collection rule to perform transformations. Okay. So this is the level of customization which is available with the DCR. Now, since our focus is more towards Windows and Linux for this particular video, so let's talk about some of the very important concepts which is related to Windows and Linux. Okay. Data collection rule can only be applied to Azure VM and Azure Arc enabled servers, okay, which means that you must onboard your on-prem AWS and GCP virtual machines to Azure Arc before you can deploy Azure Monitor Agent. Because when it comes to Windows servers and Linux machines, Azure Monitor Agent is deployed in the form of an extension, whereas for client machines, you have to install the MSI. Okay, so again, I will be showing you all these methods, but this was just an FYI. Okay, now if you remember, this was the deck that I have used in my last video where I have specifically pointed out the three different functionalities which DCR has to perform, or which will be defined in DCR to be very precise. Okay, but when you go ahead and create a data collection rule, there are two more set of options that you have to pay attention to. Okay, the very first one is for which platform you want a data collection rule to be created. Okay, let me switch to my browser and get started with the data collection rule creation process, and then things will be exceptionally relatable. Okay, now this is my browser where I've signed into portal.azure.com, and now I'm going to just search for data collection rules. I'm going to click on this option, and then I'm going to click on create. Now, the first option is very generic, which is, let's say, the rule name, and I'm just going to name it as, let's say, sample1 DCR. My subscription is already selected, and then I'm going to select my resource group, which is Sentinel. Okay. Now here I'm going to select this option of location, which is Central India. And as you can see, I'm getting this option of platform type, which has three different options: Windows, Linux, and all. Now, depending upon the option that you're going to select here, okay, you will get a respective set of options in this particular section, which is collect and deliver. Okay, so as of now, let's say I have selected Windows. I'm just going to skip this part of resource. And if I go here and click on add data source, what you will see, I'm getting the option of performance counter and Windows event logs. Okay, but if in case I come back here again and I select Linux, and this time if I go here, you will see I'm getting this option of Linux syslog and performance counter. Okay, so practically there can be a thought, that can come, that whether is it possible to scope or by mistake, let's say, can it happen that a Linux DCR gets scoped to Windows? No, that will never happen. And I will show you how. Okay, so again, coming back to the same point, that depending upon the options that you're going to select here, whether it is Windows, Linux, or all, different set of options will get highlighted in collect and deliver section altogether. Okay, but now let's talk about that for each of these options which are available here, what all can be collected. I mean, if I'm selecting Windows, then what type of logs can be collected? If I'm selecting Linux, then what type of logs can be selected? Or let's say if I'm selecting all, then what type of logs can be collected? Now, if you select all, then you will get all the options. Okay, let's come back to our deck and explain you this option in detail. So which platform has three different options: Windows, Linux, and all. For Windows, you can capture performance and Windows events, which basically means any event which Windows is generating as an operating system. For Linux, you can capture performance logs and all the different facilities which exist in syslog. Okay, I've just shown you the list. In fact, the exact naming convention that will come in DCR. So these are multiple different facilities which exist in syslog, and you will be able to capture the logs that are getting generated for all these facilities, as well as the log type, whether it is, let's say, error or critical or warning or info. I mean, these are the different categories which exist in syslog. But this option of all is typically applied to IIS, custom text, and custom JSON. Now, with this being said, when you select this option of all, what you might have seen, that I'm also getting this option of Windows, events, and Linux. Okay, so now this is just my recommendation that if you want to capture logs specifically from Windows and Linux, then choose these options. Don't go with this option. Only use this option when you want to collect logs through APIs. And as we move along with this playlist, I will show you n number of different artifacts in terms of why I am suggesting this kind of approach. Okay, so now I'll click on cancel and I'll again come back to Windows. Okay, so a short summary: if you're ingesting Windows logs, choose Windows option. If Linux, choose dedicated Linux option, and select this option of all only when you want to ingest either IIS, custom text logs, or custom JSON logs. Okay, now the next option that we were getting was related to selection of resource. Okay, now as I've said before, that a DCR can only be applied to Azure VMs and Azure Arc enabled servers, which means that you have to onboard your machines first to Azure Arc and then associate them with data collection tools. Now, this section is basically this part, which you see resources. Okay, so for now, I have populated the name of my DCR, my subscription is selected, my resource group is selected, my region is selected, and my platform is Windows. Now, one more aspect that I would like to highlight here, and that is data collection endpoint is not required when you have selected Windows or Linux. And you can read this information here. Our data collection endpoint is optional for collecting Windows event logs, Linux syslog, or performance counters, it is required for all the other data sources. For example, if you want to capture IIS logs, okay, then you can select data collection endpoint. But if you're just capturing Windows events and performance counter, then data collection endpoint is not required. Okay, let me show you this as well. So as of now, Windows is selected. If I go here and if I click on add data source, what you will see, these three options are grayed out. Okay, but the moment I'll come back here and if I select my data collection endpoint, and now if I come here and click on add data source, what you will see, these three logs are now enabled. I mean, these three categories are now available to get added as a data source. Okay. Now there is a very specific purpose behind having data collection endpoint, and we'll cover that as well in a lot more detail. But for now, assume that you want to capture performance logs and Windows event logs or performance logs and sys logs from Linux machine. Okay. So now the moment I'll click on next, now I can go ahead and add the respective resources. Now, when I click on add resource, what I will get is the list of machines which are Windows or which have Windows operating system installed. Okay. Now let me expand all these resource group and show you a very quick match. Okay. So what you see right now is the list of all the machines that exist in my 2 subscriptions, and these are all Windows machines. Okay. Now 1 and then these 5, these are Azure Arc machines, and this is an Azure virtual machine. Okay. Now this console that you see right now has Azure Arc opened up, and here I have applied a filter just to show me the Windows machines. Okay. And as you can see, this is the same list that I'm getting over here. Okay. Now this is the reason why I have highlighted a point before, that if you have selected Windows in basic option, then the scoping itself will also be only limited to Windows machines altogether. Okay. Now from here, I can just select any of my machine and click on apply. Now here is the catch. The moment I'll go ahead and create this data collection rule, Azure Monitor Agent will be automatically installed on this particular machine with the help of Azure Arc in the form of Azure extension. Okay. Now this is the behavior that you will get with Windows servers. But when it comes to client machines, then you have to install the MSI package. As you can see, it shows here for Windows 10 and Windows 11. You have to download the client installer. Okay, so this was Windows specific behavior. Okay, now let me open this console again and just show you this same configuration that we were doing for Linux. Okay, so here I'm just going to name it as sample2. I'm just going to select one of my resource group, and then here again I'm going to select Central India, and then here I'm going to select Linux, and now I'm going to click on next. Okay, again, if I click on add resource and if I go ahead and expand all the different resource groups that I have, what you will see, it will show me the list of machines which are Linux only. Okay, so now I've expanded all the resource groups, and as you can see, I'm getting the list of all the Azure Arc enabled servers, as well as my one of Azure virtual machine, which has a name file server. And this is the section where I have again navigated to Azure Arc, and I have applied a filter of Linux machines. And as you can see, this list is same to what we are getting here. Okay, so but there are certain aspects as well which is related to this particular option, and that is selection of resource. Okay, the very first one is for Windows servers which are non-Azure, you have to onboard them to Azure first, as I've already covered this option, as Azure Arc enabled resource, and then you can associate them with data collection rule. Now, what do I mean by this? That while you are creating data collection rule for Windows as a platform, once you have clicked on this, you are getting the list of all the Azure Arc enabled servers. You can just click any one of them and then scope them to this particular DCR. Okay. The next aspect is for Windows client machine, an MSI package installation is required. For Linux machines, only Azure Arc onboarded resources can be scoped to data collection rule apart from Azure VMs. Okay. Now, whenever any resource is added to data collection rule, Azure Monitor Agent is installed automatically in the form of extension. Okay. And that's the last point, that Azure Monitor Agent is deployed in the form of extensions. Okay. Now let's talk about the third part, which is more related to what type of data should be collected. Okay. Now, as I've shown you before, that if you select Windows as a option, then you will get the option to choose events and performance. If you choose Linux, then you will get performance and syslog. And this setting is also termed as data source setting. Okay. So this is my DCR, which I was creating for Linux. Let me add one machine here as well, and then click on next. And if I go ahead and click on add data source, you can see for Linux, I'm getting performance counter and Linux syslog. Okay. But this option of custom, I mean, practically speaking, the end-to-end option is all. Again, it is related to custom log ingestion, which includes IIS, custom text logs, and custom JSON logs. And as I've suggested before, please use this option only when you want to ingest data with the help of API. Okay. Now here for Linux, let me just go ahead and click on this option of performance counter, and let me just add this as our data source. Okay. I'll click on this option again, and let me also add Linux syslog. And here exactly you can see the list which I was showing you in the deck, that for each and every facility, you are getting the option of what type of logging should be ingested. Okay. Now, this was all about knowing the section which covers what type of data should be selected. Okay. Now, the next aspect is how to transform the data. Now, this is something which is very critical, and there are two methods of achieving this kind of configuration. The very first one was related to table configuration itself. Now, what do I mean by this? That when you log in to portal.azure.com and when you open any of your workspace, let's say I'll open the one which is currently active, which is this one, which is Sentinel, and then I'm going to click on tables. Okay. Now, all the data which is getting captured or which is getting ingested into the workspace will exist in any of these tables. Okay. So I can click on this option and then click on create transformation. What you will see that this particular console is also asking you to create a data collection rule. Okay. So this kind of customization is directly applied to the table itself, which means irrespective of the source which is sending data to this particular table, the transformation that you have applied will be applicable to any one or any kind of agent which is speaking to a specific table altogether. This is the table instance transformation which is available. The next one is related to DCR, okay, which means I am applying a transformation specifically to a DCR altogether, which means if 5 machines are scoped to one specific DCR, then the data ingestion from those particular machines will only be transformed. For rest of the machines, data will ingest as it is. Okay. Now, don't worry about this. I mean, don't get confused. This is slightly complicated, but the moment you will watch the transformation video, you will be able to relate it. As of now, just keep these things as a reference point. Now, here is the catch. When you go ahead and create a data collection rule, okay, from the default console itself, let's say from here, you can see I am not getting any option to perform transformation. Now, the reason behind that is because when you want to implement a transformation to a data collection rule, that has to be done through Azure REST APIs, and I will be showing you that as well. As of now, just keep these two things as a reference point, that there are 2 types of transformations which are available. The very first one is related to the table instance of the workspace itself, and the other one is the one which will be added to the DCR itself. Okay. Now, the next thing is where exactly the data should be ingested. I mean, the selection of workspace. Now, this is something which is applicable to each and every data source that you add here. Okay. So this was the rule which I was creating for Linux. And imagine that I have two different workspaces where I want this data to be ingested. Okay. Now, when it comes to performance counters for Linux, I want the destination to be one of my workspace which has name, let's say, performance monitoring. Okay. And I can click on save. But when it comes to Linux syslog, then for this particular log type, I want it to be ingested to my Sentinel workspace, and I can click on save. So what you have seen right now, that on the first section, I have defined for which platform the data has to be collected, to which machine this DCR has to be applied. Okay. And then from that particular machine, performance counters should be collected and they should be ingested to this particular workspace. And when it comes to Linux syslog data, it should be captured and then get ingested to Sentinel workspace. Now, this same concept is also applicable to Windows. Okay, I can click on add content and deliver. And here I can say that for performance counter, make sure you ingest everything to my workspace, which is performance monitoring. And for, let's say, Windows event logs, capture, let's say, everything. Okay. Let me just select all these options for now. Okay. And then make sure you get this data ingested to my Sentinel workspace. Okay. So this is what it is when it comes to data collection rule end to end. Okay. Now, there is one more information which I wanted to show you. And let me just quickly click on create and get one data collection rule created so that I can show you the data ingestion workflow, which I was referring to when I was talking about the tables. Okay. Perfect. So now my data collection rule is created, and this is the one which we were creating. And I can just click on this option of JSON view, and I can show you that if, let's say, performance data is getting captured, okay, then here exactly you can see it has been defined that data ingestion should happen to Microsoft-perf table. Okay, here Microsoft's mean that this table is created by Microsoft out of the box, and perf is the name of the table. Similarly, if, let's say, Microsoft events are getting captured, then they should go to this particular table altogether. Now, as you can see, destination is this particular name because this is what my workspace is all about. You can see these two IDs are different. I mean, this is the level of detailing that I will be covering end to end for this entire series. So make sure you watch this end to end and you will be able to implement everything possible which is moreover related to DCR. So let's talk about a quick summary of what all we have discussed in this video. We have discussed about data collection rule end to end. I have shown you the process of how to create one. Then I have discussed about practically every component of data collection rule. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the best practices for creating data collection rule. Now, if you think that this channel is helping you to learn anything new, please feel free to subscribe and share this video with your technical community. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.